Amazing grace won't save nobody. A young girl stands in the courtyard at curfew, ribbon knotted tight at her wrist, and begins to sing. Her voice steadies the dogs, calms the night while footsteps slip past the fence line into freedom. But when dawn breaks and the missing are counted, a violent guard swears the hymn was witchcraft, and the overseer threatens to burn every Bible and quilt on the property. Then a rider arrives with a sealed letter. The master's debts are called in, payment due at public reading day. The girl overhears talk of forged papers, a missing county clerk, and a seal that doesn't match the ribbon. Deep in a chapel basement, she finds a quilt with a hidden binding, and stitched inside is a manumission clause 30 years old, buried because someone didn't want it found. Storm water rises. Patrollers block the ferry. A counterfeit ring rolls across the courthouse floor. What truth is sewn into thread and wax? When the seals are pressed side by side in front of the crowd, will the song that saved lives in the dark be enough to break the lies in the light, or will the girl who sang it burn for daring to be heard? The kitchen yard woke in pieces. First the rooster, then the iron pot clang that meant breakfast fire, then boots. Lena stood beside the wash basin, ribbon tie at her wrist, watching steam curl off the pot rim. She was 8 years old and small enough that the overseer's wife still called her kitchen help instead of field hand. Her fingers were quick with kindling and her voice steady enough to lead grace before the quarter eight. Those two things kept her close to the house. She heard the boots before she saw him. Hale came around the corner of the smokehouse, lantern still lit even though dawn had broken pink behind the tobacco bar. He was young for a guard, maybe 25, and mean, in a way that felt like performance. He wanted someone to see him be cruel. This morning he had an audience. 2 patrollers swapping shift at the lane gate, and old Bo from the stable leading the mule team out. Hale stopped at the fence rail, one dude up on the lowest slat, and grinned wide. "You hear my dogs last night?" he called to the patrollers. "Trained them on scent and sound both. They know the difference between a hymn and a run." One patroller nodded. The other spat into the dust. Holly's grin stayed fixed. "Song won't save nobody." "Not here." Lena's hands went still in the basin water. She didn't look up, but her ears held every word the way they held every note when Aunt Hester hummed while binding wounds. Perfect pitch, Hester called it. A gift that made you valuable and visible, all at once. The patrollers rode off. Hale swung his lantern once and walked back toward the quarters, boots loud on the gravel. Bo came past the wash basin slow, mule reins loose in his hand. He was old, maybe 60, maybe 70, and his back bent like a sickle from decades under the plow. But his eyes were clear. He stopped to let the mule drink from the trough. "Lena," he said, voice slow as the water slapped. "Tonight, after the bell." She glanced up. His face gave nothing away. "What happens after the bell?" "Singing," Bo said. "You start it. Pitch has to be steady. Dogs listen to pitch before they listen to scent." Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "Why me?" "Because you don't waver." Bo tugged a mule forward. "Tie that ribbon tight. When the sun dies, listen for the first chain clink. Then you sing." He walked away before she could ask anything else. Lena stood in the yard as the morning filled with voices, and Hester calling for firewood, toddler Jonah crying from the cabin porch, the clatter of tin cups on the breakfast board. She looked down at the ribbon on her wrist. It was faded blue, edges frayed, but she'd kept it knotted there since her mother died 2 winters back. Her mother used to hum while she worked, low and even, the kind of sound that made a room feel safer. Lena pulled the knot tighter. When the sun dies. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew the shape of fear turning into something you could hold. The corridor cabins sat in a double row behind the main house, each one barely wide enough for a cornhusk mattress and a fire pit. Lena shared hers with Aunt Hester, Jonah, and 2 women who worked the laundry. The walls were thin. You could hear everything. Coughing, praying, the shuffle of bare feet on dirt floor. By the time the curfew bell rang, the corridor was supposed to be silent. Tonight it wasn't. Lena sat on the edge of the mattress, ribbon between her fingers, and listened. A chain clinked softly outside once, twice. Then footsteps, careful and quick, moving past the cabin wall toward the back fence line. Aunt Hester sat near the fire, hands busy with a needle and thread. She didn't need lamplight to see by. She was a midwife and herb woman, the one the mistress sent for when fever spiked or a baby came early. She knew how to be still in a way that made other people feel safe enough to move. Across the cabin, one of the laundry women, a mother named Ruth, stood by the door, her teenage son Samuel beside her. Both of them had bundles wrapped in old cloth. Both of them looked at Lena. "Now," Hester said quietly. Lena's throat went dry. She opened her mouth and let the first note come. Amazing grace. Her voice was small at first, just a thread of sound in the dark cabin, but it was on pitch, exactly on pitch, and within 2 breaths Hester joined her. then Ruth, then Samuel in a lower register that made the walls hum. How sweet the sound! The hymn spread. Lena heard it catch in the next cabin, then the next, voices layering soft and slow like a quilt pulled over the whole quarter. She kept her eyes on the fire and her voice steady. Not loud. Loud would sound like defiance. This had to sound like comfort, like evening prayer, like nothing that would make a guard lift his head. Outside, the footsteps kept moving. Lena controlled the tempo the way she controlled her breathing. When she felt the song speed up, fear pushing into the rhythm, she slowed her line, pulling the others back with her. When she heard the dogs shift and whine near Holly's post, she softened the verse, making the sound a blanket instead of a blade. The hymn became a wall, no a river, something that moved and covered at the same time. Ruth and Samuel slipped out the door. Lena didn't watch them go. She kept singing, kept her gaze on the embers, kept her hands loose so the ribbon wouldn't pull tight enough to snap. That saved a wretch like me. Hester's voice wove around hers, steady and low. Across the corridor, other voices answer. The song was a map now. Every verse a signal, every breath a step. Lena's chest ached, not from the singing, from the weight of knowing that if this failed, the punishment would fall first on the ones who stayed. Then she heard it. Boots, coming closer. Holly's lantern swung into view outside the cabin window, yellow light cutting across the dirt yard. The singing didn't stop. It couldn't stop, but Lena felt every voice tighten, every breath shorten. The boot stopped at the edge of the song. Hale stood just outside the circle of hymn sound, lantern raised, face half in shadow. The dogs paced beside him to lean hounds, trained for scent and chase. They should have been barking. They should have been straining at the leash. Instead they sat, ears up, listening. Lena kept her eyes down but didn't stop singing. She was visible now sitting near the open cabin door where lamplight from inside stilled across her face. She was the one leading the pitch. If Hale wanted to stop the hymn, he'd have to stop her first. He took a step forward. "Nose," he said, voice cutting through the verse. "That's all this is, nose." No one answered him. The song kept going, soft and relentless. Lena held the note, letting it sit in the air between them like a hand raised in peace. Holly's jaw worked. He looked at the dogs. They were still sitting, heads tilted, almost calm. He yanked the leash once. They stood but didn't bark. "I said it's just nose," Hale repeated, louder this time. Across the yard, Bo appeared in the doorway of the stable shed. He carried a lantern of his own, angled low so the light pooled at his feet instead of spreading wide. Lena saw him tilt it twice quick, deliberate, and then set it on the ground. The hymn shifted to the next verse. Lena watched Holly's face from under her lashes. He was young enough to still believe in his own authority, young enough to think that if he said something was nothing, it would become nothing, that the song wouldn't shrink, and the dogs wouldn't bark. She felt the terrifying power of being seen and choosing not to flinch. Holly's boots scraped the dirt. He opened his mouth to say something else. A twig snapped, sharp and close. Somewhere past the smokehouse, in the dark beyond the cabin row, Holly's head jerked toward the sound. His lantern swung wide. Dogs pulling forward now, noses low. Lena didn't move. She kept singing, kept her shoulders loose, kept a tempo as steady as a heartbeat. Hale took 2 steps toward the smokehouse, then stopped. The hymn was still going. If he left the corridor to chase shadows, the song would keep spreading. And if the song kept spreading, he'd lose the thing he wanted most, control of the night. He turned back, lantern high, and stared straight at Lena. She met his eyes for one breath, then looked down at her hands, ribbons still knotted at her wrist, and sang the next line. "I once was lost, but now I am found." Holly's lips pressed into a thin line. He yanked the dogs back toward his post near the lane and walked away, boots heavy, lantern swinging like a fist. The hymn didn't stop until he was gone. The verse was ending when the new patrollers arrived. Lena heard the horses, first 2 of them, coming up the lane at a walk, then voices, low and official, the kind that carried even when they weren't trying to. She glanced at Hester. The older woman's face stayed calm, but her hand stilled on the needle. The shift swap. Bo had warned her about this. Patrols change twice a night on big properties, once at curfew, once before dawn. The overlap meant extra eyes, extra questions, extra danger for anyone trying to move unseen. Lena kept singing, but she listened hard. Outside, Hale met the new men near the lane gate. She couldn't see them, but she could hear the edge in Holly's voice, tight, defensive, like a man caught between orders. "Everything quiet?" one of the new patrollers asked. "Quiet enough," Hale said. "Just him singing. Same as every night. We're supposed to check passes. Boss says runaways been spotted to counties over." Lena's stomach dropped. She kept her face still and repeated the line she just sung, pulling the tempo slower, buying time. Hester joined her on the repeat, and across the corridor other voices echoed the deliberate drag. The hymn became a rhythm you could walk to, or run to, or slip past the cornfield edge too. The patroller's boots crunched gravel. Hale said something low, probably an excuse about why he hadn't checked the cabins himself. Lena heard the faint jingle of a bridle, the creak of saddle leather, and then, distant but clear, a dog barked once. Not Holly's dogs, somewhere farther out, past the property line, maybe near the cornfield or the stand of trees where the road bent toward the river. Then silence. Lena's heart hammered, but she didn't let the song waver. She held the note exactly where it needed to be, letting the pitch settle into the air like a soft hand on a nervous animal's neck. The dog didn't bark again. One of the patrollers muttered something. Hale answered with a grunt. Then the horses moved off, hooves fading down the lane. Lena finished the verse and let the hymn trail into quiet. Hester reached over and touched her wrist just once, brief and warm, and then stood to bank the fire. Across the corridor, the last voices faded. The cabins went dark. Lena lay down on the mattress, ribbons still knotted tight, and stared at the roof beams. Her throat ached, her hands shook, but somewhere out past the cornfield, someone was moving, and the hymn had held long enough to let them pass. The night stretched long and thin. Lena didn't sleep. She lay still and listened, for boots, for dogs, for the bell that would mean discovery. It didn't come. Instead, dawn crept in slow, first gray, then pink, then the hard yellow light that meant work and heat and another day. She rose before the breakfast bell and went to the wash basin. The yard was empty except for Bo, already leading the mule team toward the field gate. He didn't look at her, but as he passed, he let his hand brush the fence rail twice. Soft, quick, safe. Lena exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. By mid-morning, she heard the rest. Mrs. Harrow, the Quaker woman who sometimes brought preserves to the mistress and always left the wagon parked near the stand of trees past the cornfield, had been seen heading toward the river road before dawn. A covered wagon, someone said, moving slow, wheels muffled by wet grass and wind. Lena worked the kitchen fire and said nothing, but she felt it, the sharp, bright edge of relief, and under it, the cold weight of knowing that success meant retaliation. By noon, the bell rang early, not the work bell, the summons bell, the one that meant everyone to the yard. Now, Lena set down the kindling and walked out into the sun. Hale stood at the center of the yard, face red, jaw tight. Beside him was Crawford, the overseer, tall and lean and mean, in a way that didn't need performance. Crawford ran the books, managed the debts, and made sure the property turned profit even when the master was too sick or drunk to care. Behind them both stood the master himself, Whitmore, pale, shaking slightly, a man pressed by debts he couldn't name and a household he couldn't control. Head count. Hale barked, line up. The quarter families came forward slowly. Lena stood between Hester and Jonah, ribbon visible at her wrist, eyes down. Crawford counted, once, twice, then he stopped and looked at Hale. Two missing, Crawford said, voice flat. Holly's face went white, then red again. They were here at curfew. I checked, you checked nothing. Crawford snapped. You stood at your post and let them sing. The word sing came out like an accusation. Lena felt every eye in the yard turn toward her. Hale pointed. She started it, that one. She sang and the dogs went quiet and, enough. Crawford's voice cut like a blade. He stepped forward, boots loud on the packed dirt, and looked straight at Lena. Amazing grace, that what you sang? She met his eyes and nodded once. Him helped them vanish, didn't it? Crawford said softly. Like a spell. It was a prayer, Hester said, voice steady. Crawford turned to her. Prayer, spell. Same thing when it covers a crime. He raised his voice so the whole yard could hear. Next time I hear singing after curfew, I burn the Bibles, I burn the quilts, and I burn the cabin that started it. Silence dropped like a stone. Whitmore shifted, pale face glistening with sweat. Crawford, we can't. We can, Crawford said. And we will. Then hooves sounded on the lane. A rider came fast, reining up hard at the gate. He wore a courier's satchel and carried a letter sealed with red wax. Mr. Whitmore, the rider called. Summons from town. Debts called in. Payment due at public reading day. Whitmore's knees buckled. Crawford caught his elbow, face tight. The rider tossed the letter down and rode off without waiting for a reply. Crawford picked it up, broke the seal, and read in silence. When he looked up, his expression was harder than Lena had ever seen it. 3 days, Crawford said. We have 3 days to settle accounts, or the property goes to auction. Whitmore made a sound like a sob. Hale stared at the letter, then at Lena, and his face twisted into something between rage and fear. This is her fault, Hale said. That him started all of it. Crawford folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his coat. Then we'll finish it at the reading, he said. Public, legal, permanent. He walked away, pulling Whitmore with him. Hale stayed in the yard, staring at the quarter families like he was memorizing faces. Lena stood still, ribbon tight at her wrist, and felt the song turn from shield to weapon in the span of a single letter. That night, Whitmore collapsed. It happened fast. 1 minute he was standing in the front parlor, letter in hand, shouting at Crawford about creditors. The next he was on the floor, breath short, skin slick with fever sweat. The mistress screamed for help. Crawford sent a boy running for the doctor, but the doctor was 3 miles off and the roads were soft from recent rain. Instead, his assistant came, a young man named Caleb with clean hands and a leather bag full of bottles and tools. Lena was in the kitchen when Hester was called to the parlor door. The mistress wouldn't let her inside. Field hands weren't allowed past the threshold when the master was down, but Hester stood at the doorway and called instructions while Caleb worked. Did her root the jar with the blue thread, steam, not smoke, wet cloth under his head, breath slow, counted like a hymn. Lena brought the jars from the pantry, hand steady even though her heart kicked hard. She'd heard Caleb use Latin once, and he was talking to the doctor, words she didn't know but recognized by their shape and rhythm. She stepped into the parlor doorway beside Hester and said quietly, "Aqua, radix, vapor." Caleb's head jerked up. He stared at her. "What did you say?" "Water, root, steam," Lena said. "Like the doctor says." Caleb blinked, then nodded once, sharp, and reached for the jar she held. "You know the words." "I know the sound," Lena said, "and what they mean when he uses them." Hester touched Lena's shoulder, brief, approving, and stepped back so Caleb could work. Whitmore's breath was ragged. Caleb mixed the tonic, poured it slow between the man's lips, and set a kettle for steam. Lena stayed near the door, watching the rhythm, breath in, breath out, like the tempo of a lullaby, like the hymn she'd sung 2 nights before. She began to hum, low, no words, just the shape of amazing grace stretched into something soft and steady. Whitmore's breathing slowed, not calm, but steadier. Caleb looked at her again, eyes sharp with something that might have been respect or fear. "Keep that," he said, "exactly like that." So she did. Across the room, Hale stood in the corner, arms crossed, face dark. He was supposed to be guarding the front gate, but he'd followed the commotion inside. Now he watched Lena, a way he'd watched her in the courtyard, like she was a problem that needed solving. "Which singer?" he muttered. Hester turned to him, voice cold. "You want him to live or die?" Hale said nothing. After an hour, Whitmore's eyes opened. He stared at the ceiling, breath shallow but even. Then he turned his head toward Caleb and whispered, "Bring the clerk the papers." Caleb frowned. "Sir, you need rest." "The clerk," Whitmore repeated, voice cracking, "the papers." Before the reading, Crawford stepped into the room from the hallway, face hard. "I'll handle the papers," he said. Whitmore's hand lifted weakly. "No, the clerk, seal, proper." Crawford's jaw tightened. He looked at Hale. "Ride to town, now, find the clerk and fix the papers before the reading." Hale nodded, eager. "What needs fixing?" "Everything," Crawford said quietly. Lena's stomach turned cold. She kept humming, kept her face still, but her ears caught every word. Papers, seal, clerk. She'd seen the master's documents before, passed through the kitchen when the mistress needed them carried to the parlor. Thick parchment tied with ribbon, sealed with wax. The ribbon said colors, the wax had stamps. She didn't know what they all meant, but she knew they mattered. And now Crawford wanted them fixed. Hale left the parlor and the house, boots loud on the porch steps. A few minutes later, Lena heard hooves and the creak of saddle leather. She looked at Hester. The older woman's face was unreadable, but her hand rested briefly on Lena's wrist, over the ribbon, and pressed once. "Listen, remember, move when it's time." Lena nodded. Night fell again, and Hale rode out with a lantern swinging like a threat. The kitchen fire burned low. Lena sat on the porch step and watched the lantern light disappear down the lane, and for the first time since the hymn started, she understood. This wasn't about singing anymore. It was about what the song had uncovered, and what someone was trying to bury before the reading day came. The chapel sat a half-mile past the property line, tucked into a grove of post oak and sweetgum. It was a country chapel, plain board walls, no steeple, just a cross nailed above the door and a bell that rang on Sundays when the circuit preacher came through. Most of the white families used it. Some of the freed blacks did too, when the preacher allowed it. Reverend Pike was the kind of man who allowed it. He was older than Bo, thin as a rail, with hands that shook when he held the Bible but steadied when he prayed. He'd been a preacher for 40 years and a friend to runaways for 30. He never said it outright, but everyone knew. If you made it to the chapel basement, you'd find quilts, hardtack, and a mat stitched into the binding of an old ledger. Lena and Bo reached the chapel just after midnight. They'd slipped out during the shift swap again, using the same hymn cover, the same careful timing. This time Jonah came with them, riding on Bo's back, small hands gripping the old man's shirt. The Bo was only 3, but he was quiet when he needed to be. Pike met them at the side door, lantern shielded, and pulled them inside without a word. The basement smelled like damp earth and old wool. Pike led them down narrow stairs to a room lined with shelves, jars of preserves, sacks of cornmeal, and a trunk shoved into the corner under a quilt. "You're running," Pike said. "It wasn't a question." "Not yet," Bo said, "but we need to know what's real and what's paper." Pike nodded slowly. He opened the trunk and pulled out the quilt patchwork, faded, edges frayed from years of use. He spread it across the floor, and Lena saw the stitching, tight, deliberate, with turns and pauses that looked like they meant something. "This belonged to a woman named Celia," Pike said. "She ran 30 years back, made it north, sent this back with a note. The binding holds what the book won't say." Lena knelt beside the quilt. She traced the stitches with one finger, humming softly, not the hymn, just a low note to help her think. The pattern repeated, turn, pause, turn, like the tempo she'd used 2 nights ago, like a map written in thread. "What's in the binding?" Bo asked. Pike pulled an old ledger from the shelf and set it beside the quilt. The ledger was tied with a ribbon, faded red, edges worn, and the pages inside were filled with names, dates, and amounts written in careful script. "Probate records," Pike said. "Old ones, back when this county kept everything in one book." He opened the ledger to a page near the middle and pointed to a margin note, barely visible in the lamplight. "Manumission clause, see binding. Oath ref, see Hull." Lena's breath caught. "What's a manumission clause?" "Freedom," Pike said quietly. "Written into a deed or will. Legal. Binding, if it's real. And if it's not?" Bo asked. "Then it's just thread and ink." Pike closed the ledger carefully. "That the Fugitive Slave Act makes every road to laws at once. Even with papers, you're not safe until you're past the line. And even then," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Thunder rolled outside, low and distant, the kind that meant rain coming hard. Lena looked at the quilt, then at the ledger, then at Bo. "We have to turn this into proof before Hale gets back with whatever Crawford told him to fix." "How?" Bo asked. "Public reading," Lena said. "If the papers are wrong, we show it. If the binding is real, we open it where everyone can see." Pike's hands shook as he retied the ledger. "If the bridge goes in this storm, you'll have to move by ferry, and the ferry means passes. You'll need papers that hold up." Lena thought of the ribbon colors she'd seen on Whitmore's documents, the wax seals, the way Caleb had looked at her when she named the Latin words. "We'll get them," she said. Pike nodded. He handed the ledger to Bo and folded the quilt back into the trunk. "Go before the rain hits. And remember, truth is a stone. You can carry it, but you can't make it lighter." They left the chapel by the side door, moving fast through the dark grove. The first raindrops hit just as they reached the property line. Hale reached town before dawn. Lena didn't see it happen, but Caleb told her later, whispering in the kitchen while the mistress fretted over Whitmore's fever. Hale had ridden straight to the courthouse and found the deputy clerk, a nervous man named Morris, who handled seals and stamps when the head clerk was away. Morris wasn't supposed to seal documents without the head clerk present, but Crawford had sent money ahead, and money made rules bend. Hale gave Morris a list: new passes for the Quarter families, a revised deed note, and a probate addendum that would clarify Whitmore's debts in a way that made them harder to dispute. Morris hesitated. "Where's Clerk Havens? He's supposed to approve." "He's not available," Hale said. The way Caleb told it, Hawley's hand had rested on his belt, near the pistol, the whole time. Morris stamped the papers, but he didn't use the official seal. Instead, he pulled a ring from a leather pouch, a signet ring with a shallow letter form, edges slightly rough, and pressed it into the wax. "This'll hold up in a crowd," Morris said. "Better," Hale replied. He rode back with the papers in his saddlebag, and by the time the rain started, he was halfway home. Caleb finished the story while Lena stirred the breakfast pot. "The clerk's missing," he said quietly. "Havens. No one's seen him in 2 days." Lena's hands stilled on the spoon. "Missing how?" "Just gone. Some say he rode north to see family. Some say Crawford paid him to disappear until after the reading." "And the seal?" "Wrong," Caleb said. "I've seen Havens's seal. The letter form is deep and clean. What Morris used is a copy. Close, but not right." Lena looked at him. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She turned back to the pot, mind racing. A forged seal, missing clerk. Papers that would hold up in a crowd but not under scrutiny. If they could force a side-by-side comparison, real seal versus false, the fraud would show, but that meant getting to the courthouse, finding the real clerk, or at least finding the real seal, and doing it before the public reading in 2 days. The storm hit that night, not the slow, steady rain that softened roads and filled cisterns. This was the kind of storm that turned creeks into rivers and rivers into floods. The sky cracked open and poured, and by dawn the lane was a mud trough and the low fields were under 6 inches of water. Lena stood on the porch and watched the rain hammer the yard. Across the way, Bo leaned against the stable door, face grim. The bridge would go. Maybe not today, but soon. Mrs. Harrow appeared in the lane just after breakfast. Wagon wheels sunk deep in the mud, horse straining. She wore a plain gray dress and a white hat that dripped water like a roof edge. She pulled the wagon to a stop near the kitchen and climbed down carefully. "Delivery," she called to the mistress, holding up a basket of preserves. The mistress swayed from the parlor window, distracted by Whitmore's fever, and didn't come out. Mrs. Harrow walked to the kitchen door. Lena met her there. "Bridge is groaning," Mrs. Harrow said quietly. "If you're moving, you move tonight. Probate office has a back door. I can get you there. But only after dark. We need to see the real seal," Lena said. "And the ledger, before the reading." Mrs. Harrow nodded. "Tiller's at the river landing. He'll run the ferry if the bridge goes. But patrols are checking passes now. You'll need papers that match." Lena thought of the ribbon colors, the wax stamps. The way Morris had pressed a false ring into soft wax and called it official. "We'll get them," she said. Mrs. Harrow handed her the basket. Inside, under the jars, was a folded cloth and a small pouch. "Wax," she said, "and a ribbon spool, in case you need to make something look right." Lena took the basket and nodded once. Mrs. Harrow climbed back onto the wagon and drove off, wheels cutting deep tracks through the mud. By noon, the bridge groaned loud enough to hear from the house. By evening, it was gone. The ferry landing sat at the bend where the road met the river. It was a flat-bottomed barge, wide enough for a wagon and team, pulled across by a man named Tiller who'd worked the crossing for 30 years. He didn't ask questions. He just checked passes and pushed off. Lena, Bo, and Jonah reached the landing just after dark. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the river ran high and fast, brown water slapping the pilings. Tiller stood on the barge, pole in hand, watching them approach. He was a big man, shoulders broad from decades of poling, face weathered and unreadable. "Tasses," he said. Bo handed him an old pass one Whitmore had signed years ago for a trip to the mill. It was faded, edges soft, but the seal was real, or had been real. Tiller looked at it under his lantern. Then he looked at Lena. "This ain't current," he said. "It's all we've got," Bo said. Tiller's eyes flicked to the road behind them. 2 patrollers were riding toward the landing, lanterns swinging, boots loud on the wet gravel. Lena's heart kicked hard. She stepped forward, close enough to see the pass in Tiller's hand, and pointed to the ribbon. "Blue thread," she said quietly. "Wax is red. That's Carter County seal, not Whitmore County." "Wrong match," Tiller frowned. "What?" "The ribbon and wax don't match this county," Lena said. "Check the color. It's off." The patrollers reined up behind them. "Everything clear, Tiller?" Tiller hesitated. He looked at the pass again, then at Lena, then at the patrollers. "Shift swap," one of the patrollers said. "We're just checking. Boss says Runaway's been using old papers." Tiller handed the pass back to Bo. "Looks fine to me." "Old, but fine." The patroller leaned forward in his saddle. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Tiller said. "I've been running this ferry since before you were born. I know a Carter County seal when I see one." He waved them onto the barge. The patrollers exchanged a glance. Then, instead of pushing, they turned their horses and rode back toward the main road. Probably didn't want to deal with paperwork during a shift swap. Probably didn't care enough to challenge Tiller's word. Lena exhaled slowly. Tiller pushed the barge off the bank and began poling across. The river was loud, current pulling hard, but his strokes were steady. Halfway across, he looked at Lena. "How do you know about the ribbon?" "I watch," Lena said. Tiller nodded. "Keep watching. You're going to need it." The far bank came up fast. They climbed off the barge and into the dark, rain starting again, and behind them the river rolled on. The probate office sat on a side street, behind the courthouse a narrow brick building with a single lamp burning in the front window. Mrs. Harrow waited. In the alley beside it, wagon covered, horse stamping softly in the mud. "Clerk's not here," she whispered when Lena and Bo reached her. "Hasn't been for 2 days. But the files are inside, and the back door lock is weak." Caleb stepped out of the shadows behind the wagon. He carried a leather satchel and a candle stub. "I can get us in," he said. "But if we're caught, it's jail. Or worse." "We're already worse," Bo said quietly. Caleb nodded. He led them to the back door, slid a thin blade into the latch, and pushed it open with a soft click. Inside, the office smelled like old paper and lamp oil. Shelves lined the walls, floor to ceiling, crammed with ledgers, deed books, and file boxes tied with string. A single desk sat near the front window, ink bottle and quill waiting for morning work. Lena moved to the shelves and began scanning spines. Most were labeled by year and county. She found the probate section and pulled down a ledger marked 1851 to 1853. "What are we looking for?" Caleb asked. "Double entries," Lena said. "Debt listed twice, or a sale that doesn't match the D." Bo pulled another ledger and began flipping pages. "Here," he said after a minute. "Whitmore's name. Debt to Crawford, recorded twice. Different amounts." Lena came to his side. The entries were written in the same hand, but the second one had been added later, ink slightly darker, line slightly crooked. "Fraud," Caleb said quietly. Lena turned to the margin notes. Most were short cross-references, initials, dates, but near the bottom of the page, almost hidden in the binding crease, she saw it. "Manumission clause-stitch binding. Hall Oath, see quilt record." Her breath caught. "It's real. The clause is real." Caleb leaned closer. "Where's the quilt?" "Chapel," Lena said. "Reverend Pike has it, outside." A dog barked, then another. Lena's stomach dropped. She moved to the window and looked out. Lanterns were moving down the street. 2, 3, 4 of them. "Patrol, they're sweeping early," Mrs. Harrow said from the doorway. "We have to go now." Lena grabbed the ledger. "We take this. It's proof." "It's theft," Caleb said. "It's truth," Lena replied. Bo already had the back door open. They slipped out into the alley, rain pelting their faces, and ran toward the wagon. The dogs barked closer. Mrs. Harrow whipped the horse forward, wheels splashing through puddles, and they turned onto the side street just as the patrol lanterns rounded the corner behind them. Lena held the ledger tight and counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The lanterns didn't follow. They made it back to the ferry landing just before dawn, soaked and shaking, and Tiller pulled them across without a word. On the far bank, Lena looked back at the town and saw the courthouse steps filling with people under a clearing sky. Public reading day was tomorrow. They spent the day hiding the ledger and preparing for the confrontation. Bo took the ledger to the chapel and gave it to Reverend Pike, who wrapped it in oilcloth and tucked it into the quilt trunk. Mrs. Harrow went back to her farm to ready the wagon for one more night run. Caleb returned to Whitmore's house to keep watch and report anything Crawford or Hale said. Lena stayed in the corridor and worked the kitchen fire like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Hale came back that afternoon, saddlebags heavy with fresh stamped papers. He handed them to Crawford in the yard, and Crawford smiled a thin, cold smile that made Lena's skin crawl. "Readings tomorrow," Crawford said. "Fees you'll hold. And once Whitmore signs in public, the debt's locked. No disputes, no escapes." "What about the girl?" Hale asked, nodding toward the kitchen. Crawford glanced at Lena. "She's a problem." "The problems end when the law speaks." Lena kept her eyes down and kept stirring the pot. That night, after the curfew bell, she sat on the porch step and watched the stars come out. The storm was gone. The sky was clear. The air smelled like wet earth and possibility. Bo came and sat beside her. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Lena agreed. "You scare?" "Yes." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." Bo looked at the ribbon on her wrist. "Your mama wore one like that." Lena nodded. "She said it was for remembering." "Then remember this," Bo said. "Truth is a stone. You carry it. You don't drop it. Not for fear. Not for convenience, not for safety. You carry it all the way to the light." Lena's throat tightened. "What if the light doesn't come?" "Then you become the light," Bo said. He stood and walked back to the stable, and Lena sat alone on the porch, ribbon knotted tight, and felt the weight of tomorrow settle into her bones. The stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere past the property line, the chapel bell rang once, a signal, or a prayer, or both. Lena closed her eyes and let the hymn rise in her chest, silent and steady, and promised herself she would not waver. When the sun came up, the courthouse steps were packed by mid-morning. Public reading day brought everyone. Landowners settling debts, families disputing wills, merchants filing liens, and a crowd of onlookers who came for the spectacle. The steps were white and stone, worn smooth by decades of boots and rain, and at the top sat a table with the county clerk's ledger, a wax seal, and a bell that rang to signal each new case. Lena stood at the edge of the crowd with Bo, Jonah, and a handful of quarter witnesses. Mrs. Harrow waited near the wagon, pretending to sell preserves. Reverend Pike stood on the far side of the steps, holding a cloth-wrapped bundle that no one had asked him to explain yet. Crawford arrived first, leading Whitmore by the elbow. The master looked pale and unsteady, but he was walking. Hale followed close behind, hand resting on his belt, eyes scanning the crowd, like he was looking for trouble. The deputy clerk Morris sat at the table, nervous and sweating despite the cool morning air. He had a stack of papers in front of him, all tied with ribbons, all stamped with wax. The bell rang. Morris stood and called the first case, a land dispute between two farmers. It was settled in 10 minutes with a signature and a handshake. The second case, a probate claim. Another signature, another handshake. Then Morris called Whitmore's name. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Everyone knew Whitmore was in debt. Everyone knew the property was on the edge. Crawford stepped forward and placed a set of papers on the table. Debt settlement and revised deed, he said loudly. All in order, just needs the master's signature and seal. Whitmore reached for the quill, hand shaking. Lena's heart kicked hard. This was it. If Whitmore signed, the fraud would lock, the debts would stand, the quarter would be sold or split, and the truth would die on paper. She stepped forward, pushing through the crowd, until she reached the base of the steps. Hale saw her and moved fast, blocking her path. Stay back, he said. Lena didn't stop. She looked past him, straight at Morris, and said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. He sang Amazing Grace to cover an escape. He said so himself. In the yard. 2 days ago. The crowd went silent. Holly's face turned red. She's lying. I'm not, Lena said. She looked at Crawford. He accused me of using a hymn to help people run. He said song won't save nobody. He said it was wickedness. He said I should be punished. Crawford's jaw tightened. What's your point? My point, Lena said, lifting her chin, is that if a hymn is a crime, then let the song be heard with the truth. The crowd murmured louder. A few people nodded. A few looked confused. But everyone was listening now. Morris looked at Crawford. What is she talking about? Nothing, Crawford said quickly. She's a field hand. She doesn't know. I know singing, Lena said. And I know seals. And I know when a ribbon doesn't match the wax. She pulled the pass from her pocket, the one Tiller had looked at the night before, and held it up. This was stamped with a Carter County seal, but it's supposed to be Whitmore County. Someone made a mistake, or someone lied. Morris leaned forward, squinting at the pass. Let me see that. Hale tried to grab it, but Lena stepped back, and Bo moved between them, silent and steady. Morris took the pass and held it up to the light. His face went pale. This isn't right. The ribbon is blue. We use red for Whitmore County, and the letter form is shallow, Lena said, not deep like Clerk Havens's seal. Havens is gone. Crawford snapped. We use the deputy seal. It's legal, is it? Caleb pushed through the crowd, satchel in hand. Because Havens didn't leave, he was told to disappear. And the seal you use isn't the official one. The crowd erupted into shouts and questions. Morris stood, face red. Where is Clerk Havens? That's what I'd like to know. A voice called from the back. The crowd parted, and Clerk Havens himself walked through, wet, muddy, and furious. I've been locked in a shed 2 miles out since Monday, he said. Someone paid a man to hold me there until after the reading. Crawford's face went white. Morris rang the bell hard 3 times, silencing the crowd. This reading is suspended until we verify the seals. No, Crawford said. The papers are legal. They were stamped by a deputy, with a fake seal, Lena said. Morris looked at her, then at Havens, then at the papers on the table. Bring the seal, Morris said. Both of them. We'll press them here, side by side. Let the wax tell the truth. The crowd roared approval. Holly's hand went to his belt, but Reverend Pike stepped forward, holding the cloth bundle, and said calmly, before you do, there's something else you need to see. Pike unwrapped the bundle slowly, and the crowd pressed closer to see. Inside was the quilt, patchwork, faded, stitched with care and years of use. Pike spread it across the table, pushing Morris's papers aside, and the binding caught the light. This quilt belonged to a woman named Celia, Pike said. She ran 30 years ago, made it north, sent this back with a note that said, the binding holds what the book won't say. He turned the quilt over, showing the seam along the edge. There's a manumission clause stitched into this binding. Legal, sign, sealed, hidden because someone didn't want it found. Crawford surged forward. That's a lie. There's no such clause. There is, Lena said. She pulled the ledger from Bo's satchel, the one they'd taken from the probate office, and opened it to the margin note. It's referenced here. Manumission clause, stitch binding, whole oath. Morris took the ledger and read the note. His hands shook. This is probate record. Official. And it's been hidden, Pike said, for 30 years. Because if it came to light, half the debts in this county would fall apart. The crowd murmured, louder now, angry and confused. Crawford pointed at the quilt. Burn it. It's fraud. It's the truth, Lena said. A man stepped forward from the crowd, older, gray-haired, wearing a coat that marked him as a creditor or agent. Let's see it, he said. Open the binding. Right here, right now. Pike looked at Lena. She nodded. He took a small knife from his pocket and carefully cut the stitches along the binding edge. The thread came loose slowly, and inside, pressed flat and yellowed with age, was a single sheet of paper, folded and sealed with wax. Pike unfolded it. The paper was a manumission clause, written in careful script, dated 1823, and signed by a man named Charles Hall. It freed a woman named Celia and her descendants, in perpetuity, contingent on an oath of service fulfilled. The crowd went silent. Morris read the clause twice. Then he looked at Crawford. This is legal. If the oath was fulfilled, the manumission holds. The oath was never fulfilled, Crawford said quickly. There's no record. There is, Pike said. He pulled another paper from the bundle, a letter, signed by Hull and witnessed by 2 magistrates, confirming that Celia had served the agreed term and fulfilled the oath. This was hidden in the same binding, Pike said. Along with the clause, the agent leaned over the table and examined both documents. Then he looked at the crowd. These are real. The seals match. The signatures match. If this clause applies to anyone still living, they're free. By law. Crawford's face twisted. No. This is a trick. It's the truth, Lena said again. She looked at the crowd, at the faces watching her, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some just curious, and she felt the weight of the hymn in her chest, the ribbon on her wrist, and the promise she'd made to carry the stone all the way to the light. Let the papers speak, she said. Press the seals. Open the ledger. Let everyone see. The crowd word agreement. Morris rang the bell. Bring the seals, now. Hale pulled the signet ring from his pocket, the one Morris had given him 2 days before. He set it on the table, wax pouch beside it, and stepped back. Havens pulled the official seal from his satchel, a heavy brass stamp, with a deep letter for and clean edges. He set it beside Holly's ring. Morris heated wax over a candle and poured 2 pools onto parchment. Then he pressed Holly's ring into one and Havens's seal into the other. The crowd leaned in. The difference was immediate. Holly's ring left a shallow impression, edges rough, letter form blurred. Havens's seal left a deep, clean mark, every line sharp and unmistakable. Morris held them up side by side. This, he said, pointing to Holly's impression, is a counterfeit. This, pointing to Havens's, is the official county seal. The crowd erupted. Holly's face went white. He looked at Crawford, then at the steps, then back at the seals like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I was told it was legal, he said weakly. By who? Morris demanded. Hale pointed at Crawford. He gave me the ring. He said it would hold up. Crawford backed toward the edge of the steps. I was trying to protect the property. The debts were real. The debts were doubled, Lena said. She opened the ledger to the page Bo had found. Look, same debt, recorded twice. Different amounts. That's fraud. The agent took the ledger and scanned the entries. His face hardened. This is illegal. Double entry bookkeeping to inflate debt. If this is real, half these accounts are void. Morris looked at Whitmore. Did you authorize this? Whitmore shook his head, pale and trembling. I let Crawford manage the books. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, the agent said coldly. But that doesn't make it legal. He turned to the crowd. I'm declaring these debts under review. Any accounts tied to this ledger will be audited, and anyone who used a forged seal to stamp documents will answer to the county. Crawford turned and ran. He made it 3 steps before 2 men from the crowd grabbed him and hauled him back to the table. Hale stood frozen, staring at the seals, and for the first time since Lena had met him, he looked afraid. Morris rang the bell again. This reading is suspended pending investigation. All documents stamped with the counterfeit seal are void, and the manumission clause will be reviewed for applicability. He looked at Lena, who are Celia's descendants. Lena's throat went dry. She looked at Bo. He nodded once. My mother, Lena said quietly. And me. The crowd went silent again. Morris picked up the manumission clause and read it carefully. Then he looked at the letter from Charles Hall. Then he looked at Lena. If this holds, he said, you're free. By law, you and anyone else who can prove descent. Lena felt the world tilt. Her knees wobbled. Bo's hand steadied her shoulder. But, Morris continued, it has to be signed, officially, by the current magistrate, and sealed with the proper seal. He looked at Whitmore. And you have to release your claim, publicly. Whitmore stared at the papers, at Crawford being held by the crowd, at Hale, still frozen by the table, at Lena, standing at the base of the steps with her ribbon knotted tight, and her voice finally heard. He picked up the quill. I release the claim, he said, and I'll sign the charter. No more secret punishments. No more forged ledgers. No more lies. The crowd murmured approval. Morris dipped the quill in ink and prepared the documents. Then let's make it official. The sun broke through the clouds, hard and bright, and the courthouse steps filled with light. Lena stood still, ribbon tied at her wrist, and felt the hymn rise in her chest. Not sun, not yet, but waiting for the ink to dry and the seal to press and the truth to become law. Whitmore signed slowly, hand shaking, quill scratching across the parchment. First the manumission, then the household charter, then the debt release. Morris checked each signature, nodded, and heated fresh wax. He pressed Tavins's seal firmly into each document, the brass sinking deep, leaving a clean, undeniable mark. The crowd watched in silence. When it was done, Morris held up the manumission and read it aloud. By this document, witnessed and sealed, Lena, daughter of Celia's line, is hereby freed from bondage, in perpetuity, with all rights and protections afforded by law. The crowd erupted into shouts, some cheering, some protesting, some just stunned. Lena stood at the base of the steps and felt tears slide down her face, not from relief, not yet from the weight of carrying the stone this far, and finally setting it down. Bo put his hand on her shoulder. "You did it, we did it," Lena said. Morris folded the documents and handed them to Lena. "These are yours. Keep them safe, and if anyone questions them, you come straight to the courthouse. You understand?" Lena nodded, holding the papers like they might dissolve if she gripped too hard. Whitmore stood at the table, face grayed, and looked at Crawford being hauled away by 2 deputies. Then he looked at Hale. "You're done here," Whitmore said. "Pack your things. Leave tonight." Hale opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked down the steps without a word. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring and arguing and shaking their heads. Some stopped to congratulate Lena, some glare. Most just left, uncomfortable with the shift in something they'd thought was fixed and permanent. Reverend Pike came to Lena's side and smiled. "Come to the chapel porch," he said. "Let every voice answer." They gathered at the chapel as the sun sank low. Lena, Bo, Jonah, Aunt Hester, Mrs. Harrow, Caleb, Reverend Pike, and a handful of quarter families who'd been freed by the charter. Some had papers now, some were still waiting for the audits to clear, but all of them had witnessed the truth spoken in public, and that was something no one could take back. Pike stood on the chapel porch and raised his hands. "We give thanks," he said, "not for ease, not for safety, but for the courage to carry truth into the light." He nodded to Lena. She stepped forward, ribbons still knotted at her wrist, and began to sing, "Amazing Grace." How sweet the sound. Her voice was small at first, just a thread, but Bo joined her, then Hester, then Mrs. Harrow, then the whole group, voices layering and lifting, until the hymn filled the grove and spilled out toward the road. This time, no one had to whisper, no one had to time the tempo to cover footsteps or calm dogs. The song was just a song, honest, open, free. Lena sang until her throat ached and her chest felt light, and when the last note faded, she looked at the faces around her and saw the same thing she'd felt 2 nights ago in the courtyard. Hope, fragile, trembling, but real. Pike came to her side and handed her a small cloth bundle. "For the road," he said. "Hardtack, dried apples, and a map. Just in case." "Just in case of what?" Lena asked. "Just in case the world changes slower than the law," Pike said quietly. "You have papers now. The papers don't stop hate, or fear, or men who think freedom is something they can take back when no one's looking." Lena nodded. She understood. Mrs. Harrow stepped forward. "I'm driving north tomorrow. There's room in the wagon, if you want to come." Lena looked at Bo. "What do you think?" "I think you're free to choose now," Bo said. "And that's a gift most folks never get." Lena looked at the chapel, at the grove, at the road stretching north toward the river. Then she looked at Jonah, still holding Hester's hand, and made her decision. "We'll stay," she said, "for now, until the audit's clear and the quarter families know what's next. Then we'll see." Mrs. Harrow nodded. "Fair enough, but if you need a ride, you send word." "I'll come. I will," Lena said. That night, they moved under the new rules. Lena carried her papers in a leather pouch Bo had stitched together from an old harness. Jonah rode on Hester's back. Bo led the way, lantern angled low, guiding them along the road toward the river landing. They weren't running. They were relocating, legally, with documents that said they had the right to travel, to settle, to choose. But the road still felt dangerous. They reached the ferry landing just after midnight. Tiller stood on the barge, pole in hand, watching them approach. "Tasses," he said. Lena handed him the manumission. He read it under his lantern, eyes moving slowly over the words. "The seal, the signature." Then he looked at her. "This real?" "It's real," Lena said. Tiller nodded. He handed the paper back and waved them onto the barge. "Then you're free to cross." They climbed aboard, and Tiller pushed off. The river ran high, current still strong from the storm, but his strokes were steady. Halfway across, Lena looked back at the far bank and saw the courthouse steps, empty now, bathed in moonlight. She thought of Holly's face when the seals were pressed, Crawford's hands being bound, Whitmore's shaking signature, Morris ringing the bell. She thought of the hymn and the quilt and the ribbon that had held through everything. And she thought of her mother, who'd worn a ribbon just like this and hummed low enough to make her room feel safe. Tiller's pole dipped into the water once, twice, steady as a heartbeat, and the far bank came up fast. They stepped off the barge onto solid ground, and Lena felt the shift, not just in location, but in weight. The stone was set down, the light was here. Bo pointed to a stand of cypress trees, where the road bent toward higher ground. "That's the way," he said. Lena nodded. She looked at the ferry pole, exactly where she'd seen it in her mind 2 nights ago, and smiled. Hester touched her shoulder. "You ready?" "I'm ready," Lena said. They walked toward the tree line, lantern swinging, and behind them the river rolled on. By dawn, they'd reached the safe house. Mrs. Harrow had told them about a small cabin on free land, owned by a Quaker family who asked no questions and offered bread, water, and a place to rest. Lena sat on the porch step, papers folded in her lap, and watched the sun rise. Jonah slept inside, curled against Hester's side. Bo sat beside the cabin, mending harness leather, hands steady even after a night of walking. A rider came up the road just after breakfast, a deputy from the courthouse, carrying a sealed letter. Lena's heart kicked, but the deputy smiled. "Message from Clerk Morris," he said. "Audits are done. Quarter families are clear. No debts, no claims. You're free to settle where you choose." He handed her the letter and wrote off. Lena opened it slowly. Inside was a single line, written in Morris's careful script. "The seal holds. The truth stands. Go in peace." She folded the letter and tucked it into the pouch with the manumission. Hester came to the porch, Jonah on her hip. "What now?" Lena looked at the road, at the trees, at the cabin and the land beyond. "Now we build," she said. "We find a place, we plant, we teach Jonah to read and write and remember. We sing when we want to sing, and we keep to ribbon tie." Hester smiled. "Sounds like a good life." "It does," Lena said. 3 months later, Lena stood in a small schoolhouse on the edge of a freedmen's settlement, teaching a group of children to read. The schoolhouse was plain, just a boardroom with benches and a slate, but it was theirs. Built by families who'd walked the same roads, carried the same stones, and survived the same kind of stories. Lena wrote the alphabet on the slate, her hand steady, and listened to the children repeat the letters back to her. In the corner, Jonah played with a wooden horse Bo had carved. Hester sat near the window, mending a quilt, not Celia's quilt, but a new one, stitched with bright thread and careful patterns that didn't need to hide anything. After the lesson, Lena walked outside and stood on the porch. The settlement stretched out before her. Cabins, gardens, a chapel under construction, and a road that led north toward more towns, more families, more people building lives on land they could finally call their own. She thought of the hymn, of the quilt, of the ribbon and the seal, and the moment the crowd had shifted from spectators to witnesses. She thought of Hale, wherever he'd gone, and hoped he remembered the sound of the dogs going quiet under a steady pitch. She thought of Crawford, locked in a county jail, waiting for trial. She thought of Whitmore, trying to rebuild a household without lies. And she thought of her mother, humming low in the kitchen, teaching Lena that sound could be a shield and a map and a promise all at once. Bo came up the porch steps, slow and steady, and sat beside her. "You did good," he said. "We did good," Lena replied. "You think the world's changed?" Bo asked. Lena looked at the settlement, at the children running between cabins, at the gardens growing green under the sun. "I think the world changes slow," she said, "but truth changes fast. And once people see it, they can't unsee it." Bo nodded. "That's enough." "It is," Lena said. She stood and went back inside, where the children were waiting for the next lesson, and the hymn sat quiet in her chest, ready to rise when it was needed. Winter came, then spring, then summer again. The settlement grew. More families arrived, carrying papers and stories and hope. The chapel was finished. The school added a second room. The gardens produced enough to trade with neighboring towns. Lena taught reading and writing 6 days a week. On Sundays, she sang in the chapel choir, voice steady and clear, leading the hymn that had once been a cover and was now just a song. Jonah learned his letters. Hester trained a new generation of midwives. Bo built furniture and told stories to the children about the night the hymn held and the ferry crossed and the truth came to light. One evening, a letter arrived from Reverend Pike. It was short. "The quilt is in the county museum now. The binding is displayed open, so everyone can see the claws. People come from 3 counties to look at it. Some leave angry, some leave quiet, that they all leave knowing. Grace to you." Pike. Lena folded the letter and set it beside her manumission papers, both of them kept in a wooden box Bo had made with a lock and key. She walked to the porch and looked out at the settlement under twilight. Lanterns flickered in cabin windows. Voices drifted from the chapel. Somewhere a child laughed. She thought of the courthouse steps and the moment Morris had pressed the seal and the wax had told the truth. She thought of the ferry and the river and the pole dipping steady as a heartbeat. She thought of the ribbon on her wrist, still knotted tight, edges frayed but holding. And she thought of the hymn. Not the one she'd sung to cover an escape. Not the one she'd used to steady dogs or time steps or mask movement. Just the hymn. Plain, honest, free. She began to hum, low at first, then lifting. And across the settlement, other voices joined Hester from the garden, Jonah from the porch, Bo from the workshop, families from the cabins, until the whole place sang together. No whispers now, no fear. Just grace sounding like home.